commerce. So I'd like to first acknowledge that we are having this virtual meeting on the shared territories of the Squamish Lillooet Nations, and we honor their language, culture, land, and traditions. I would like to start by thanking all of our members for your continued support the Chamber receives through your annual memberships and commitments, enabling us to do the important work that we do and continue advocating on your behalf. Today, we are talking about the Small and Medium-Sized Business Recovery Grant Program, which provides fully funded grants to businesses to ensure you have the support you need during COVID-19 and beyond. The Resort Municipality of Whistler and the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation of the Province of British Columbia join us today as we break down how the program works, the criteria, eligibility, and more. We are obviously using Zoom, and we'll be using the Q&A function, which is at the very bottom of your screen. So don't confuse chat room with Q&A. So Q&A is where you want to pose your questions. You can start filling those in anytime you want through the program. So you can do this by going to Q&A, simply type in your question. You can also, if you're an audience participant and you just want to vote any of them up, you can do that by hitting the like button. To walk us through the program and answer all of your questions today, I'd like to welcome Morningstar Pinto, give a wave, Director of Outreach and Engagement with the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. Also John Cruz, CPA, CGA, and the Manager of Finance and Administration with also Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. And of course, our very own homegrown Toni Metcalf with the RMOW. She is the Manager of Economic Development and Tourism Recovery. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to our guest. So Morningstar, she's currently supporting Stronger BC projects for the ministry and working to amplify and promote the small and medium-sized business recovery program. John is currently supporting also Strong BC and leading the adjudication team for the small and medium-sized business recovery. Toni has been with the RMOW for several years and has just transitioned this month into the new part-time role as Manager Economic Development and Tourism Recovery after recently serving as the interim GM, General Manager for the resort experience since March of 2020. So Toni, I'm going to hand it off to you. I am going to close my video and microphone down and I will be back at the end of the program. So I will leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to share my screen now as we set up this presentation. I have a short presentation to share. Let's see if we get this right. No, 1 second. Okay, I think we are right. Can I get just a thumbs up, John? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. So here we go. So I had the pleasure of attending a session a couple of weeks ago now with other economic development professionals across the province. A webinar that was set up by John and Morningstar, who join us today to share more information about the small and medium-sized business recovery grant. During that session, I felt it would be a great opportunity to share more directly this information with our business community here in Whistler. I know everybody is very busy at this time trying to keep their businesses alive and process through all the different programs that are available at this time. And so today I've put together a few short slides. There's only about 7 slides or so. And the objective is very much to some really clear information to you, and then we'll have some time, as Melissa said, to have questions and answer with John and Morningstar, who are directly with the program. So let me start here. As I mentioned, the objective today is very much on making it easier for you as a business owner or operator to get a successful application into the grant program and for you to get funding to support your business in the short term. We're very much going to focus on providing you with guidance on what is required for a successful application, and as I mentioned, provide you with direct access to our colleagues in the province, Morningstar and John, who join us today. I just want to upfront make a quick mention that this program runs until March 31st this year at this time, or until the funds are fully allocated, whichever comes first. So if you don't already have that process in play, we encourage you to certainly start that sooner rather than later. In terms of a short agenda for today's presentation, I would like to take you through just some highlights of the program, focus on the eligibility of the program and what you need to apply, what amounts are available through the grant program, talk about the recovery plan, which is a key element of helping you through the recovery phase and to use these funds, and then specific direct access to the application. So let's talk about this small and medium-sized business recovery grant. In terms of highlights of the program, I think many of you may be aware there is a base grant available of $10,000 to $30,000 per business there. And for especially relevant to many Whistler businesses, there's an additional top-up for tourism-related businesses of an additional $5,000 to $15,000. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along today. Additionally, for those who need support or may be looking to develop their recovery plan with some assistance, there is an additional $2,000 in funding available through Small Business BC to assist you in accessing professional services to prepare or implement your recovery plan. As I mentioned, the program runs until March 31st this year, so time is ticking, or until the funds are fully allocated. Just to put in perspective, what we're going to be talking about today is an application process. It's really a two-step process. One is the application itself, which really looks at your eligibility as part of the program, and then the need to develop a recovery plan. So there's two steps in that application. And then obviously there's the approval process, which I'm sure John and Morningstar will be able to talk about a little bit more today, so that you can receive funding and then some reporting back on that. So there's some highlights in terms of what's available to our business community. I'd like to now just talk a little bit about eligibility criteria and hopefully break this down into some real clear, succinct criteria that you can check off and confirm that you're eligible. Just a note that the eligibility criteria for this program did change in the middle of December last year. If any applicants have already submitted an application prior to that, there is no need to resubmit. Even if it was under the old criteria, they can still be assessed at this time. But let me talk through eligibility criteria. I'm going to touch on 5 different points here. Firstly, talking about business ownership. So business ownership, one of the eligibility criteria is that the majority share of the business is to be owned by 1 or more BC residents. In terms of your operations, operating in BC for at least 18 months as at the date of your application, and that your business is primarily operating, located and conducted in BC. And that the business's ownership has not prepared the business for closure, dissolution or for sale following 1st of February last year. In terms of employees, this program, as it's named, is a small and medium-sized business recovery grant. So it is focused on small and medium-sized businesses. And that criteria there relates to a number of employees, up to 149 people employed in BC and for at least 4 months of the calendar year. So there is some consideration which may be relevant for many Whistler businesses around seasonality. On the financial side, obviously this grant program is to support businesses who have had substantial revenue losses. So the criteria here is comparing revenue losses compared to the same period in 2019, so pre-COVID. And at least 70% at some point during March or April of last year compared to the prior year, and at least 30% of revenue loss during May to date. And the second point there is that it is focused on businesses that have had positive cash flow in the previous financial year prior to the 1st of February. So obviously a viable business to be provided support. And then on the tourism top-up, this obviously is an additional amount that is available to tourism-specific businesses. So the idea is that all businesses that apply to the program would meet all of the above eligibility criteria. And then there's a declaration. So the applicant would declare that a significant part of your business, the total goods and services, are purchased by visitors. So that's a little bit around the eligibility criteria. And what I've done is I've just put some notes next to each of these to give some perspective on what documentation is required to be able to prove and support your application. And hopefully you won't need to do a lot of work to actually get the right documentation, because most of it is really your financial statements or schedules from your tax return. So if we start at the top there, you'll see that for business ownership, there are some specifics around what can support your majority share of the business. In terms of operations, business tax returns for the last 2 reporting years. Employees, so some payroll data there, whether it be T4 from your tax return, or whether it's payroll filing documents or a check or a payroll process that you do within your business. On the financial side, you'd be able to use financial statements that you would have, whether it be balance sheet, income statement, and statement of cash flows. And then, as I mentioned earlier, for the tourism top-up, it's really a signed declaration that your business is significantly focused on visitors and that they are the ones purchasing goods and services from you. So we'll make this slide available because I think it provides a little bit of a snapshot on eligibility and what documents you might need to pull together to support your application. The next thing we'll look at is the available funding and what funding is available to our businesses through this program. So as I mentioned, the grant and tourism top-up are available to businesses that meet the eligibility criteria and that develop a recovery plan as part of this process. Grants are exactly as they're termed, and they don't need to be paid back, but you should be aware that they are taxable income. So in terms of the grants that are available, the base grant, which I mentioned, is somewhere between up to $10,000 to $30,000, and this is based on pre-COVID annual revenues. So you can see the different categories of your revenue that would translate to what grant amount you may be eligible for. And then the second part of this is the tourism grant top-up, which is based on the number of BC residents that were employed prior to COVID. And you can see there. So for example, if your business was generating $200,000 in annual revenue, then you'd be looking at the left side of the screen where you'd be entitled to $15,000 in the base grant. And if you had, say, 3 employees that were BC residents, then you'd be looking at an additional $10,000. So that just gives you an idea of, so you can translate for your own business what that potential opportunity is. So that now gives you a perspective on the funding that's available. And what that funding is for is the recovery plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that recovery plan and what it is. It's specifically a list of actions that your business can take to support continued operation under what we obviously call new normal conditions during COVID. So if your application meets the criteria, you have 2 options to complete your recovery plan. The first one there is, as I mentioned earlier, you can access professional services that will be assigned by Small Business BC to help you prepare your recovery plan. And there is an additional $2,000 on top of the recovery grant that can be used to fund those service provider needs. Alternatively, you can prepare your own recovery plan yourself or from your own service provider at your cost. And then finally, just to talk a little bit about some examples of recovery plans that you may look to consider for your business, just give you an idea of types of things that are possible. If you're looking to pivot your business and provide new services to customers, then obviously you could outline what that would be as part of your recovery plan. You may look to pivot your business and provide more of your business services online, or to use online services to market your business opportunities. You may also be looking at, I think most of our businesses already have their outdoor patios established from earlier this year in the summer, but if anyone's looking to do new outdoor patios or social distancing barriers, or looking to modify the physical floor plan of your business and you need funding to do so, you could potentially look at the recovery plan to cover that. So that's really the snapshot of the small and medium business recovery grant. In terms of how to apply, as you see here, bcbusinessrecoverygrant.com. That's the website. It's the provincial website, and the application process is there. It goes directly into the program team. There's a couple of information details that are available online, and there's also an email address that you can follow up with afterwards. But as you know, we do have program staff from the province with us. So we're moving now to question and answer, and I welcome Morningstar and John to answer some questions that we may have here. So at this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So if you do have any questions that you have, please do put them into the Q&A in the Zoom, and we can get to those as we go. So under Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can add your questions.
And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind if I gave a couple small updates to the information that you talked about before we get this started as well. Is that okay, Toni?
Sure, go ahead, Morningstar, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to provide two small updates. One is that one of the things that we looked at was the ability to retroactively pay folks back for some of the work that they had done prior to this grant, or up to this grant, becoming a lot more available. So the grant was announced September 17th. And so a lot of people were already doing work for their businesses. So businesses do now have the opportunity to list retroactively some of the work that's been done. So let's say you already bought your patio heaters. You could put in, when you put them in, as long as it's after the announcement, so after September 17th, any of that work that you've done, we will take into account and we'll be able to retroactively give you funding for that, which I think is great. Great to know. And then the other part is the service providers. So right now, businesses can be matched with a small business BC service provider to help them. They get $2,000 of support outside of this grant money to do this work. They can also do it by themselves or use a service provider that hasn't been registered with Small Business BC. They don't get any grant funding for that. But we also now have the opportunity for, like, if a business has either a certified bookkeeper that's in good standing with the CPBCAN, or a certified professional financial planner, a practicing lawyer in good standing with the Law Society of BC, or a CPA that's in good standing with the CPA of BC, they can actually ask their service provider that they already trust and work with to register with Small Business BC, and then they can ask to be matched with that or that group. So that and the service provider can then be matched and bill up to $2,000 with Small Business BC. So just another way to help businesses there.
Great, thank you very much, Morningstar, for that update. Maybe I'll jump into a couple of questions that we have here. Can I start with we've heard from a number of businesses in Whistler who have been looking at the process and have been putting applications in. And I wonder if you could just provide some information to us around your current turnaround time for processing fully completed applications.
Pass that one to John.
Sure, love to do that one. Thanks everyone, and thanks for having Morningstar and myself for the call. Yeah, I'll dive into that question right away, but just want to make mention that just leading up to Christmas, the minister took a look at our program and just wanted to make the changes that were definitely needed to make it more inclusive for businesses, because we learned a lot in the first 4 months in terms of how administratively burdensome the program was and how it was set up initially. And so up until about December, our sort of turnaround time was actually pretty manageable because we weren't getting a lot of uptake. I'll tell you, I was helping with reporting and we were probably getting 15 applications a day, and it was not anywhere near what we wanted to see. We wanted to really get this out there and the message out there, and businesses being able to apply and not finding it that it's such a burden to apply. Like Toni mentioned earlier, that a lot of the information we're asking for now already exists. We're not asking for people to rewrite their whole financial systems, right? It's something that you're already preparing for your tax returns. You're already preparing as part of your annual statements. So that's all we're looking at, right? And we're not an enforcement program, we're a recovery program. And so we're hoping that we can turn around files a lot more sooner. So as of just leading up to Christmas, the week leading up to Christmas, we have made the program much more inclusive, much more streamlined, and businesses, we're finding that they're able to submit information a lot sooner and a lot quicker. But we have seen a ramp up of applications. So we're seeing upwards of probably 5 times what we're used to, but we need to get that number up to 10 times. And that's why we're Morningstar and I are touring the province, so to speak, virtually to meet everybody and get the word out there. But in terms of turnaround time, we're still trying to get to 2 weeks. We do realize that at the moment we have quite the backlog of files that have suddenly come upon us just right after Christmas and New Year's, and we're still working through that right now. And we have a process in place where we're indicating to applicants that have submitted completely their applications that we've done a bit of a triage, and we've looked at your files. We believe everything's there, and you'll be an adjudicator will be assigned to review your files. And for the folks that are still missing some information, we are also indicating to them that there's some files that are information that's still missing, and please submit those so that we can move along with the process. But I'm sure Morningstar will attest to we're trying to get the 2-week turnaround, at least for the first stage of eligibility, and then the next stage of recovery planning, which is if you're matched with Small Business BC, that could be another 2 weeks of planning and developing a recovery plan. And at that point, once that's all been approved, we're looking at probably another 2 weeks, I think, for payment to be turned around. So all in all, is that a fair assumption to make, Morningstar? About 6 weeks, if we can, from end to end, I think is what we're shooting for.
Yeah, I think that's what we're shooting for. And I would say that that was one of the reasons why the recovery plan time was reduced. So I would say the recovery plan, so it used to be about 24 pages and now it's about 4 pages.
Yeah.
And so there is that 2-week time frame that we've given for the work to happen with a service provider. But let's say a business has a pretty solid recovery plan, or they're like, you know what, I actually have this all in hand. I already have my business plan. I'm just going to transfer it over and talk about like my actions and what I'm going to do, and I'm going to submit that myself. You can shave quite a bit of time on that end. So I would say it really depends on how complete the application is. Right. So the less times that a business has to wait to be contacted by someone from the province, has to go back and forth on what's being submitted, and then how long that recovery plan timing takes. Right. I think those. So there's a bit of timing on our side, and there's also a bit of timing on the business side.
Thanks, Morningstar. Now I'll just add one more thing, is that Morningstar and I were involved quite comprehensively in terms of developing the new criteria. And between you and me and the fence post here, I think we can turn around files quite quickly because of how streamlined the program has become. And if we get all the information we're in, anecdotally, I'm seeing that we could probably turn around a file within the day, right? So it's really dependent on the information we get and that we're asking for, and clearing out some of the sort of questions that people have about the criteria.
Great, thank you. And maybe just a follow-up question. Now that you've been through a number of adjudication processes or adjudication with a number of applications, I wonder if you have any tips on, call it frequent common mistakes, or any tips that you'd suggest to applicants to focus on as they're putting their application together.
Sure, I'll take that one. So I'm an accountant by trade. I lived in audit, and I kind of understand what we're dealing with. Is that small business owners, they're not accountants. They never wanted to be accountants. I never wanted to be an accountant. But so asking them to put the paperwork, that's probably the biggest challenge, is getting the paperwork all together, which we said and we acknowledge that it already exists, right? So finding where that is, if it's logging into my account with CRA, talking to your accountant to just pull in your financials. Toni, to answer your question more directly, specifically the ones that we find are the toughest criteria are really about the payroll being sure that we can demonstrate, especially for tourism businesses, because we do use that number, sending in information that relates to the number of employees that you have, either employees or contracted staff that are BC residents, and confirming that they are BC residents, because this program is to support BC, right? The other thing is majority shareholder ownership of a business. We just want to make sure that the beneficial ownership is a BC resident, that we have had some applications that are foreign owned, and we are obviously making them ineligible and directing them to maybe some national programs out there or to their own country of origin, right?
Great.
Yeah, those are the two biggest ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super helpful, just to focus a little bit on what your experience has been so far. So we have quite a few other questions that have come up. If successful, how will a business receive their grant? Is it sent as a single payment in advance, or are businesses obliged to pay for expenses up front and then claim them from the grant in drawdowns?
So as Morningstar mentioned, one of the recent changes was that to allow businesses that have already endeavored to recover on their own. Obviously, we want programs to be out there and be successful, but people can't wait for that, and they probably have made changes and pivoted their business to start their own recovery. So those expenses, which have probably already been incurred, would be eligible. And so the grant funding is actually sent as a lump sum through direct deposit, EFT. We will ask for your banking information, and folks need not have to they won't see it as incremental payments. They just receive the grant entirety. We do reserve the fact that we can come and ask for a post-audit review of your expenditures to determine that the items that are on the recovery plan are actually the items that the money was spent on. Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks.
So we have a couple of other questions around, let's start with submission of documentation, because we've talked a fair bit about what's required there. And the question relates to financial statements, as you know, and I'm also an accountant, but they can be quite long. But how do they and other documentation get submitted with the application?
So in terms of submitting documentation, applicants, obviously, when they come to our website, BC Business Recovery Grant Program, they'll be able to see the eligibility criteria and the list of supporting documentation that's required. So uploading PDFs is in Excel. Excel can work as well, spreadsheets, but PDFs work just fine. We're looking primarily at the balance sheet and income statement to determine sort of the impact of COVID around revenue loss. Obviously, one of the criteria speaks to cash flow, and we are hoping that not everybody does it because it's not a required document, but some folks have been submitting statements of cash flows. So it does help us to determine that positive cash flow as a result of operations. We would like to see that, but we can do that obviously through an income statement.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And then linked to financials, in some of the terminology that is in the criteria, it talks about at least 70% at some point during March or April, and at least 30% at some point during May to present. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that at some point?
Sure. Yeah, I think the distinction there of the term "at some point," we are reviewing it year over year. So March 2019 versus March 2020. Ministry of Finance was very clear to us as we embarked on this program that we wanted to make sure that we identified the most gravely impacted companies or businesses by COVID. And so we are looking at it as a year over year for the month of March and the month of April. What we will say though is because we have opened up this program for seasonal business and those are temporarily closed, we are looking at that so that people can really explain to us the impact of COVID, especially during March and April, the first stage of the state of emergency. And really the timing of that really, all the accountants in the room probably share the same thing, is that we make a date and we say that life works around these dates, like fiscal year ends, right? And it doesn't always work as clean as that is. So we are looking at that and trying to determine when the impact is, if that 70% is in March or April, sometime in March and April, but it is year over year for that particular month. And then the criteria for 30%, that's one of the big changes that we announced prior to Christmas. was that revenue loss has to be at some point during May to now, where the revenue losses have been at least 30%.
And I would just also add to that, John, that we have had a couple of folks reach out either to the minister or to us about concerns around being a seasonal business. So let's say you just weren't open in March or April yet, right? So we're taking that into consideration. So don't consider yourselves not a part of this process. We're trying to make this as inclusive as possible. So we've now set it on the website. We've put it in about 3 different places to make sure that it's clear that seasonal businesses are allowed to show a year over year as part of their seasonal business. So explaining, okay, I'm not open in March or April, but May and June were a heck of a time for me versus last May and June, where I usually have, X amount of tourists coming to me from international tourism coming in, this many local tourists coming, and I just haven't been able to pick it up. So for anybody on the call who is a seasonal business or somebody like, the guide outfitters, they work on a completely different schedule. So we recognize that. And so please apply and pitch your case because we're trying to make this as work for as many people as we can, as many small and medium businesses as we can. Yeah.
What I'll say to that, just to add, sorry, Toni, to cut you off there. What I'll add that is that some folks that are already doing a bit of a, they have their accountant or their finance group working on some, especially the request that we have for a summary of 24 months of actual revenue. They're probably writing a little bit of a notation related to why their impact was a little bit later or delayed because, the first state of the emergency didn't really happen until mid-March. And at that point, a lot of people had already made the revenue impact hasn't really been felt till later into April, right?
Yeah, that kind of links into a question that's being raised as well. And I'll read this so I get it clear. If it is a recovery grant, why aren't you recognizing that some businesses made it through March based on shutdown hitting halfway through? So 70% may not have happened, but the current period maybe is way worse for some people, and it's not going to get better through winter due to travel restrictions. Are you going to consider applications that have been hit hard now, but maybe weren't as badly hit in March? I think you kind of alluded to that a little bit.
Sure, I'll add a little bit more to it. Yes, obviously acknowledging that in March, because the pandemic sort of state of emergency didn't get announced till later, the impact is more trailed into April and a little bit of May, and that's what we've used at least for this cut in terms of the criteria, and that's what the Ministry of Finance was clear with our ministry in terms of how we were going to indicate which companies would we be targeting. But the minister has been really clear, and he's been saying it all along, especially leading up to Christmas, where we want to make this as inclusive as possible. And he said it himself, is that the government doesn't have the monopoly on good ideas, and we're taking a lot of feedback, and we're getting this information back and making sure that gets back to the minister to determine, is this program we're hitting the mark? If it needs to be adjusted and to make it more inclusive, then we're bringing that feedback. So all the calls that Morningstar and I have, we've been bringing back this feedback to them to make that decision. If that means that we open it up or adjust the criteria, we're willing to do that, right? So I'm going to mark that down to make sure, because the travel ban hasn't changed, right? And we still don't have at least external tourists coming to Canada. Yeah,
for sure. And especially in Whistler, where many businesses rely on the winter as a strong season to get them through the rest of the year. So winter may be harder for many businesses in that regard.
All right, I'm taking that down. So I appreciate the feedback.
Great, thanks, John.
Thanks.
And one more question just linked to the submission of financials. There's a question here. Do you need to submit financials for 2020 or just statements of revenue? For example, my financials for 2020 won't be completed until March, April.
Yeah, that's fine. Most people don't have their 2020 because either the year end hasn't completed or recently did complete. So yeah, that's fine. We're not looking at that. We're just looking mostly for the most recent financial statements, which would have been completed for 2019. We do ask for the actual revenues for the 18 to 24 months.
Great. And then linked to the 18 months, I have a question here. Are there any exceptions to the 18-month operating requirement for eligibility? A business that has been running for years under a different operator, for example, but now under a newly formed company only operating for 13 months?
Good question. We've actually seen that happening in a couple of occurrences, and those companies are still eligible as long as they can demonstrate that they were active. Now the ownership may have changed, but the business itself has always been active. And so if they don't have access to the information, that might be a bit of a challenge. But mostly, you know, in terms of due diligence, anybody purchasing a business would have probably received previous financial statements so that they can use that as their submission, understanding that they themselves haven't been operating for the 18 months, but yes, they would be eligible.
Excellent. Okay, I have a couple of other questions directly about eligibility. Is there any way a business without payroll can be eligible? So a micro business, for example, that only uses dividends?
Yep, that's fine. I want to talk more about it, but the answer is yes, they are eligible.
Great.
I can speak more to it if it matters.
So it just means that they would then not be submitting employee documentation, or they would need to submit other documentation to support that?
Well, the criteria itself is up to 149. So I'll assume that sole proprietorship or I guess in this case it would be a privately held corporation that pays their owner as a dividend for tax purposes. That's fine. Nothing wrong with doing that. If they don't have any other employees, and this is basically a self-employed proprietor or business owner or of this corporation, then that would be sufficient.
Okay. And then a question that says, does the definition of BC residents include residents who are in BC on holiday working visas?
Yes.
So within Whistler, obviously we have a lot of temporary workers who come in and may not be BC residents up until the time they arrive here, and they come in from abroad or elsewhere.
Good question. You framed it in a way that almost had me a bit confused, but yeah, temporary foreign workers would be eligible for this program as in terms of their employee. They would have, it's not a landed immigrant, it's a working permit. So they would be eligible because they would be residents of BC at the time.
Yeah, and similar for those coming out west from Ontario and elsewhere. Yeah.
We also have the same agreements. Yeah.
Excellent. This is good. So there's a couple of other questions. Maybe just quickly, I have submitted the 2020 financials as our fiscal year end in October. Does that work? If the fiscal year is not aligned with calendar year.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. The application asks for a number of employees employed as at 1st of February 2020. Is that right?
Yes, the reason that we do that is that we want to make sure that we don't, I don't want to use quote unquote the word short change, but we want to determine the impact of COVID. And so it would be premature or be inappropriate if we used post-COVID or current COVID employee numbers to make sure that your companies that are eligible for the tourism top-up get the full amount of the grant.
Okay, so maybe there's a little bit more information just come through on that one. After COVID hit, because the government was pushing for businesses to keep employees or hire new with the wage subsidy, some companies brought on employees after February 2020, but appear not to qualify.
Well, I guess they would still qualify because it's up to 149 now. So I guess it's John just looking at what the threshold is for their qualification.
Yeah. So how we currently adjudicate for that piece in terms of tourism top up, it's number of employees prior to February 1st. I'm a little bit unclear as to the question.
Yeah, it's not specifically a question, it's more some sentences, but I think if I read it, it refers to, I guess, there's two components, which I think you've just addressed. One is applicants are eligible if they meet the criteria, which is up to 149 employees as at that date. And then the tourism top-up, the amount depends on what the number of pre-COVID residents employees.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. There's a couple of questions around the $2,000 for service provider support. The first one is, how do we access assistance with filing this? you mentioned something around receiving $2,000 towards the application process.
Absolutely. So I'll take this one on. So there are three. If you want to have your service provider receive the $2,000, you either need to be matched through Small Business BC, who will match you with a service provider, or you need to have your service provider register with Small Business BC, because Small Business BC is actually doing the vetting process to make sure the service providers are one of those they meet the criteria for being a professional service provider. And then Small Business BC would be the one that pays them for up to $2,000, depending on how much time. And so part of that application process is the service provider would say, well, this is what I do, this is how much I charge per hour, and then they would bill Small Business BC. And then if a small business wants to just complete the recovery plan on their own and put it into the application, that service provider funding is not available for the small business.
Okay, and so just to confirm, the process to get the $2,000, that's within the application for the overall recovery grant?
It's a matching process that takes place after, so it's almost like phase 2. So if you think about it, step 1 is kind of making sure you're eligible and then applying. Once you apply and everybody says, okay, you're eligible, go forth, do your recovery plan. At that point, you then are either matched with Small Business BC, or you connect your business to Small Business BC, or you do it yourself. So it's the second part of the process. There is within the application you choose, and so that gives you options, and then it kind of shoots you a message depending on which way you've chosen, and then it will send you in the right direction for connecting with Small Business BC if that's the way you'd like to go.
Great, thank you. And just to confirm, the question here is the $2,000 for a service provider also a grant but taxable?
The $2,000 for a service provider is above and beyond the grant program, so it's separate. So it's a payment. So it's a payment for service from Small Business BC to the service provider. So that would be taxable, definitely.
So that goes directly to the service provider or to the applicant?
It goes to the service provider. That is a service provider. It's through Small Business BC. It goes to the service provider, and it's completely separate from the grant funding.
Okay,
yeah.
So that makes sense in terms of it's not taxable to the applicant who's applying for the grant, because the funding goes from Small Business BC directly to the service provider.
Yes.
And that's supporting the applicant.
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you very much. A few more questions. In relation to foreign ownership, would a company with 2 owners, 1 BC resident and 1 foreign resident, be eligible? So this implies a 50-50 even split of ownership. So it's not technically majority shareholder as a BC resident. How do you consider that?
So I was going to say, if it's a majority owner, then you're in the clear. But I love the nuance there, Toni. Appreciate it. Yes, that they would also be eligible. There's no one particular shareholder that has controlling share at that point, right? So it would be okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. A follow-up question that we had earlier around businesses without payroll. So we talked about where a corporation may be paying dividends to the individual. One of the parts of the application talks about submitting payroll documents. So can you just confirm that submitting documentation with the applicant would just mean that you don't provide payroll documents?
That's correct. We are looking at adding a different document checklist for those folks that are either privately held corporations that only have the shareholder as a quote unquote staff, and then for sole proprietors. So yes, for those folks, they're not required to send payroll documentation because they can't.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestion on what if someone's applying soon or in the near future, before you put out any further guidance on documentation for those particular businesses? Do you have any guidance on what they may want to consider submitting at this time?
I'm open to ideas here, but no, there's no real difference there because at that point, unless they're tourism, right, it won't really have an impact to them anyway, right? The calculation doesn't change till you hit 2 employees.
You could probably assume they're tourism, though, I would suggest.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking because of their
Coming out of
tourism.
Whistler, yeah.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, likely their tourism. I guess in that case, they would have to submit that they are the sole staff. However, they're being remunerated. If it's through dividends, that they should probably submit something to that effect. So in lieu of payroll documentation, if that's fair.
Okay, great. We have one final question. I know we're coming up to time. So do we apply for eligibility first and wait for approval before preparing the recovery plan?
Yes. Yes, please.
That's clear.
Best to follow the steps.
That's super clear in terms of an answer. Okay, I think we've managed to answer all the questions that have come through so far. If there's any final questions, please do put them into the Q&A box. Otherwise, if you put them in and or send them through afterwards and we don't get to them, we will certainly keep in contact with Morningstar and John. And thank you very much for your time. And I think it's been super helpful to hear the flexibility and the openness from the province and the program team in terms of how this program is being considered, and the opportunities for our businesses here in Whistler is super helpful. So thank you very much. Thanks. I'm going to hand back now to Melissa, assuming Melissa is going to come back on any moment now.
Can you see me? I should be on. Oh, there I am.
There you go. Back to you, Melissa. Thank you.
Amazing. Wow. That, you know, something that I do love about Zoom, because I'm on it all the time, is how many questions you can actually get through in an hour or less. So really appreciate your time, all three of you, for doing this. The RMOW for stepping up and contacting us and working together on getting this out. Toni for putting all of that information together. We have an incredibly resilient business community, and it takes this kind of forum and collaboration to really ensure that we keep doors open. So again, thank you so much. So I have one question: are non-for-profits eligible?
No, they're not. The assumption was
in the attendance, so I thought I'd better ask. So
no, I'm glad you brought it up. The assumption is that not-for-profits have other resources available for in terms of economic recovery, but we are taking that away because that question has come up numerous times, especially those that aren't registered charities, which are still not-for-profits, but you know, they may not be eligible for some of these other programming. We did bring this up. It has been raised and we'll continue to do so.
Well, maybe you and I can talk offline and we can talk through that. It'd be great to understand where that's going. So thank you so much. So again, thank you, Toni, Morningstar, and John, for taking the time to speak with our business community today. And I guess hopefully we don't see you again, but hopefully we do. You never know, right? It's kind of one of those things. For those of you who have not yet heard, before I get to that, this was being recorded, so it is being recorded. So for those of you that may not have gotten all the information, we will be posting this on our website and certainly on our YouTube channel. And we'll keep it up to date if anything changes. So you can always refer back to that in case you were trying to scribble all that information down. And again, thank you to the RMOW for making this event possible for not only our members, but future members as well in our business community to attend this. It's really important. So on a different note, just to close off, for those of you that had not heard yet this morning, Minister Ng announced today the launch of the new Highly Affected Sectors Credit Availability Program. The criteria and eligibility is not yet available, but the program is due to open on February 1st. So of course, we'll keep you posted on that. And a few events coming up that might perk your interest and certainly help you thrive to succeed is we have our virtual board governance training on February the 10th. It's $50 per chamber member, so you can sign up at whistlerchamber.com for that. The Building Resilience to Thrive online training program, that one is in partnership with ourselves, the Whistler Chamber, the BC Chamber, and the University of Victoria. So it's with Dr. Mark Colgate and Professor Brian Leacock. This will help to help mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 and help you recover through this program. So it's 6 weeks, 1 hour a week, and it's $35 for the whole thing. So well worth looking into that. So owners, managers, and supervisors. And then lastly, I really want to echo some information from Dr. Bonnie Henry yesterday and from our Mayor Jack Crompton. I first of all want to take this opportunity to really thank all of you for the enormous effort that it's taken you to go through the safety protocols needed to keep doors open. And certainly the financial investment has not been small. And you've made that to ensure our businesses stay safe and our staff stay safe and our community overall stays open during this pandemic. Yesterday did mark the first anniversary of the first reported COVID-19 here in Canada. And as many of you heard from Dr. Bonnie Henry yesterday, she continues to urge all BC residents to stay home, not travel unnecessarily, and not to engage in social interactions outside of your bubble. So saying that COVID really has plateaued at 500 cases per day, but that number is still dangerously high. So please continue to do what you're doing. Take the time to remind your staff to stay in their bubbles, not to travel, and do more in the next 2 weeks than we've ever done before. We want to keep our mountain open. We want to keep your doors open, and there is a light at the end of all of this. So let's all get across this finish line together. Reach out to us as your chamber or to the RMOW for support. We're all here to help you. So I guess in Dr. Bonnie Henry words, be kind, be calm, and certainly be safe. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.